What I love about what you do, the Daily Stoic, Stoicism in general, is how it applies to so many different aspects of life. I was listening to your conversation with Gary Vaynerchuk and also your conversation with Matt Choi.
Yeah.
And how it applies to, your ability to be the fact that you're complicit when somebody else says something and you're like,
Sure.
I take offense to that, or like, I'm so annoyed right now.
Yeah.
If you were able to actually accept that that is true, that you are complicit in those situations, do you know how much stress you would relieve from yourself in corporate America on a day in and day out basis?
It's crazy.
It's nuts. That's like a 90% lift of weight off of your shoulders. And that's just one example of all of these things that seem to span corporate America, running, entrepreneurship, writing a book, being a parent. Like that's what I've loved. And like, as I was connecting the dots for this conversation, I was like, man, there's so much that applies here, both in the nitty gritty of like hardcore corporate America, but then also, why do you run every day, incessantly and, feel like you can't get away from it almost?
The corporate example, I think, of being offended where we're complicit in it, what the Stoics would talk about is that, to me, the quintessential example is like you get an email and then you're offended by the tone.
Yep.
But the tone doesn't exist.
Yeah.
You decided that 3 periods meant something.
Yep.
Or you decided that K meant something versus okay or yes, right? And look, obviously, as human beings, one of our skills is we're good at noticing little things. We're incredibly perceptive animals. But we're so perceptive that we can often perceive things where it doesn't exist. And I think that's one of the things you learn when you get in a position of leadership or you become a boss, is now suddenly people are telling, you're hearing from people how they interpreted things that you did. And you're like, I was busy.
Yeah.
I said K because it was the fastest response that I had.
Yeah.
And I was running between 2 meetings. I meant literally nothing by it. You are and I've had employees where it almost just ultimately came to a place where it didn't work because of what they brought to the table. They were so sensitive, and I don't mean in a snowflake way, but they were just often intuiting or interpreting things as being negative about them. And it's like, I'm literally not thinking about you at all.
Yeah.
I was busy and that's why I didn't notice you in the hall or whatever, right? And so like our ability to take an objective thing or a thing that's not about us and make it about us or make it hurtful or rude or, do they not think I'm a valuable member of the team anymore? Are they getting ready to move on from me? You get in this whole thing and you realize you've had a whole conversation with yourself about someone who has 50 of you that they're working with. And you're just not as significant as your ego is making you out to be, and thus torturing yourself.
Yeah. There's such a small percentage that I've seen, percentage of people that have that awareness, that I found the team operated best when I understood that that was something that I had to carry for them.
Yes.
That especially in the difference between a place where khakis may not be, that's like the only thing you could wear when you show up on campus.
Yeah.
And 100,000 person company, lots of rules and regulations, not a lot of personality. I've had to be fully okay with the fact that how I said good morning, the tone in which I would say good morning, could have an impact on someone's entire day.
Yes.
And especially getting into a larger role at 35, like that kind of fucked me up in the head, but I would say in a good way, where I would start to carry that. I need to be super cognizant of the fact that my number one responsibility is for people to go home at the end of the day and say, today was a good day.
Yeah.
Because if they can do that on a consistent basis, all the complicated bullshit that goes along with corporate America and all the other policy and the other stuff will start to sort itself out. And like our KPIs and like our goals will be easier to hit if they're okay with that. And it did mean probably an unbalanced burden of that understanding that as much as I want to be like, okay, fine, in this moment, that person is going to potentially read it 8 different ways. And then I might have to deal with whatever those ramifications are because they're going to spiral and this is going to be their next decision. And then they're going to go to somebody else and waste 10 minutes being like, hey, is Tim mad at me about this? And I do think that there's in corporate, because of how much impact our jobs, corporate America has on mental health.
Yeah.
I do think bosses, especially when it comes to like higher level and the CEOs in the space, need to be cognizant of the fact that what we're discussing now is not a strong skill set across the board to be able to understand that, like, I don't need to overanalyze everything.
Yeah. Well, no, that's the tension, right? So you as the individual, following the advice from the Stoics, have to go, look, if somebody says something, I'm choosing to be offended.
Yep.
I control my emotions. I'm responsible for my feelings. And then you have to flip it when you're in the position of leadership or responsibility, even though you don't actually control how other people interpret what you say.
Yep.
And it's their fault if they, take it this way versus that way. You still have to expend an immense amount of effort anticipating how things are going to be interpreted. So it's like I go through the world trying not to be offended.
Yeah.
And I also go through the world knowing that, like, look, I'm not going to please everyone and some people are going to be offended by what I say, but it's still my obligation as both a boss who's trying to just get things done and then a human being who's trying to be decent to think about the weight of the words that I'm choosing and make sure that I'm not unnecessarily offending someone. And if, hey, knowing this person can handle, no bullshit, straight talk, and this person, you got to sandwich it with a bunch of compliments.
Yep.
And this person, like, if it's not in writing, they're not going to be able to handle it. Understanding that you have a lot of not control, but you have to dial it just right, or you're going to needlessly hurt people or just not be effective if you're not thinking about the consequences of your words and actions on other people. Again, even though at the end of the day, it's their responsibility and they don't control, and you don't control it.
Yeah. Sounds a lot like parenting as well.
Totally. Yes. Yeah. It's just thinking about, like, how you deliver the message. What is the message? What's the vibe of the message?
Yeah.
It's much more complicated than, I think sometimes you can read the Stoics and it seems very straightforward, like, say what's true.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, but sometimes that's going to blow up in your face. That's not to say you lie, but you have to figure out how the best way to deliver that truth.
Yeah.
So it's actually heard by the flawed person you're delivering it to.
And that you're outcome oriented as well, right? Like if my objective here is to simply get the broccoli to get eaten and to have there not be a lot of drama around that, what is the best way to make that happen?
Yes.
And then, and whether that's, hey, we need a revision to this PowerPoint deck, and the person's going to freak out because it's 4:45 on whatever day, but like here are the, things that are happening that make that a need right now.
Sure.
And then thinking about, okay, if I want the person to not freak out, I still need the thing to get done. Then I think that kind of starts to encompass, plus the understanding that they may interpret this in a certain way and be like, oh, you're just doing this to be mean because you don't like whatever about me, and that's why I have to eat the broccoli, or, I'm in trouble because I messed up this PowerPoint deck.
Yeah.
Those are the variables that, sometimes we got to bring into our head, and then.
Well, every person needs a different message. Like one of my sons is like, to get something through to him, I'm not saying you yell, because he doesn't respond to yelling, but it's like you really have to over deliver this message, and you have to deliver it multiple times for it to pierce whatever the sort of defensive bubble / not paying attention / just like determination of him. Mm-hmm. And then it wasn't until my youngest started to get to the age where he was doing some of the things that we have struggled with my oldest with a bunch. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, you can't do that. Like, you cannot bite people. I don't know how to communicate this to you. You can't bite people.
Yeah.
And then watching that just like crush my youngest.
Yeah.
And you realize, oh, you're much more sensitive than your brother. So I have, for the first 8 years of this person's life, been calibrating a severity and an intensity of message so it can be received by this one person who wants to hear it. And then this one over here is on a totally different frequency.
Yeah.
And so if I only have one way of delivering messages, it's still not going to get through over here, and it's going to crush this one over here. And so, with kids, you sort of learn how to dial in the message just right. There's some line, I think, from Confucius, this student comes to him and he's like, you should do this. And then another student comes to him and he's like, you should do this. And then this other student says, but you just gave them very different messages. One he told it to like zoom in, and the other he told them to zoom out. And the third student is sort of perplexed by this. But that's life, right? But that's what the Confucius says, is like some students need to hear this and some students need to hear that. And I think that's how it goes for people. Like the message can be the same, but the angle at which it's delivered or how it's explained can have an enormous impact as far as how it's received.